It has come up quite a bit to speak to relationships, being a parent, and the aspects of family along the path, especially if our partner or our kids are not interested or really walking the path in this specific way. The most direct pointing here is that, of course, everyone is walking the path. How could we not? Yet there are some more tangible, relative aspects that we can explore. And today, the sense of conflict that tends to arise in romantic relationships and these types of relationships is coming to the surface. When we get into a romantic relationship, our sense of vulnerability can blossom, it can open, and we tend to get pretty open, maybe not entirely. And along the way, there are a lot of bits and pieces of shame, of identity, of what wants to remain hidden that gets revealed, it gets brought to the surface. It gets poked and prodded a little. This is just an exploration in innocence if we look at it fundamentally. We can look at conflict in a relationship, in a romantic relationship, in a few ways. Oftentimes it can show up in an intellectual way, yet usually if there is conflict, there is something that is sensational about that experience. Something that can feel like deep betrayal, can feel like a strong need to protect. And those pieces by themselves can be quite revealing if we allow ourselves to sit with it. So there's some things we can play with in relative reality to illuminate some more things, to bring some more of this to the surface, or at least make it more readily apparent. Conflict itself can be quite interesting in a romantic relationship, mainly because sometimes we'll have a partner that will seemingly embody something that we could consider a more masculine energy, and then another partner embodying something that can be seen as a more feminine energy. Really, if we look at it in a fundamental way, conflict is just an exercise in trust. It's actually just an opening. It's not about the disagreement at hand. It is more about, can I trust you? How are you able to open more? How are you able to play with these potential triggers as they come? That is what seems to be happening on a fundamental level. So if we get caught in the content, we get caught in the actual aspects of relative conflict, then we are somehow searching for some sort of solution. We have a disagreement, we see something in a different way, and it must be solved. The form of an attachment theory, where we can get into, some people are anxious attachers, some people are more aloof, and those particular types of personalities tend to attract each other. There's no mistake for this. This makes perfect sense. This almost has a sense of something that's karmic involved. The anxious attacher who wants to absolutely come to a resolution in the midst of a conflict, and the aloof who must have space, and space at all costs. And so the aloof runs and the anxious chases, and that just builds more of a trigger. We tend to be naturally attracted to those who are most likely to push our buttons. This is the way the identity is attempting to orient with a relationship and with intimacy. It's interesting because really, fundamentally, it's actually working itself out. If we can allow ourselves to be with what seems to be a trigger, with what seems to be a conflict, and we spend time with what is lying under the surface, it becomes readily apparent. So, moving back to that piece with a partner who is maybe embodying something more of a masculine energy, and a partner who is embodying something more of a feminine energy. Ultimately, these two energies are seemingly diametrically opposing, especially on the surface. And so to fight for a sense of understanding is essentially impossible. This is not about an understanding or a solution. This is about allowing ourselves to embody whatever energy is present and being with that as thoroughly as possible. And even if there is an exchange that is continuing, it's not about the content. It's not about finding a solution. It's not even about understanding. It is about just being with as thoroughly as possible. And here there's a lot of other areas we can explore. We can explore aspects of listening. There was a video put out a while ago about listening in 4D. And in that state of listening, to allow each other to speak, to be completely with what feels like an essence of a trigger, a need to protect, a need to run, a need to find resolution, that burning sensation, while also being completely present in becoming the other person, becoming our partner. That type of listening brings closeness. Ultimately, we are neither masculine nor feminine entirely. Whatever we are embodying is momentary. And so sometimes it can be worthwhile to play with whatever energy seems to be coming up. And you'll be able to perceive this. A more masculine energy is, it has a force behind it. It has a need to find solution. It has a need to come to some sort of understanding. It has a need to reach a conclusion. And then there's the more feminine energy, which is an energy that is receptive, moving, changing, and maybe doesn't have explanation. And so you will see that a masculine energy is looking for explanation, while a feminine energy just wants to be with what is. Awakening in this sense, you can kind of see, will point more toward embodying something that can be considered a feminine energy. It is a step away from that which seems to have a pattern or is in a state of constant form or is predictable. It can be rather shape-shifting, that feminine energy. And so here's some things we can play with. In the midst of a conflict, if you are somehow both in a state of masculine energy, see if you can rest with what seems to be triggered, what's coming up, the sensations, the experience itself, and do not focus on the content. Be with the sensations, be with the energy as thoroughly as possible. Become the energy, become them. I am them. And in that experience, you might start to find something that's softening. And that softening is where that threshold that seems to be taking place between what it seems to be a masculine form is moving into something that is more of a feminine energy. Now, there is no actual pointing here saying one has value over the other. This is pointing to the paradox of the experience. Is there actually a separation between what seems to be this embodied masculine and this embodied feminine? Or is it actually one and the same? We can begin to look at the boundary there. We can begin to zoom in and explore and see if there is a hard line there. If you are seemingly in a situation where someone is embodying more of a feminine energy and somebody is embodying more of a masculine energy, see if you can find that line again and switch. See if you can become them. And if this happens with both people, what tends to occur is the sense of conflict, the subject at hand, the content dissolves and something else is revealed under the surface. We find that this conflict, seemingly unbeknownst to the mind, was a practice in exploring how we can trust each other even more. Strangely enough, conflicts tend to create more openings upon some sort of settling into them. And we can become confused because it can seem like it's about the resolution and that's the settling, yet it's not always that way. Now, I know that there are some practical things that sometimes need to come up in the relative world. Yet overall, those particular conversations do not have to take place during conflict. In fact, it's highly recommended that we do not engage in conflict when we need to speak to something that seems important in the relative. Those conversations are best conducted through something that seems light. Yet it's also true that these triggers that we tend to have can be deeply connected to what seems to be a serious issue. Things along the lines of finances, living situation, so on and so forth. Overall, conflict itself isn't about disagreement, even though it seems so on the surface. It's simply a mixing, a combining a listening, and it is a practice in how to trust. That's what it is. It's actually an opportunity for further opening. This is probably why a lot of you are familiar with the concept of make-up sex, because once we've resolved the conflict or it has settled, we feel a sense of closeness that might increase. So then we pay attention to the thoughts that tend to surround the experience. Did I get what I want? All these things. Is there actually a resolution in place? If we're not so driven toward the resolution, we begin to see something else. And this is just something to play with. Yet ultimately, conflict, or what seems to be conflict, isn't about what the mind is telling us. It's a play. It's an exchange. It is a game of trust and opening. And in the midst of that, as these triggers arise, it can be a demonstration to our partners of how we are able to approach this in a more honest way. Are we going to dig in? Are we going to armor up? And are we going to become cruel? Or are we going to let ourselves go a little bit more, engage with those sensations, engage with the fear that tends to arise, engage with the sadness, and demonstrate that to this person in whom we've already entrusted so much to? There's something beautiful here, something kind of gorgeous. Maybe if you allow yourself to engage in conflict in a brand new way, you will start to break a pattern of what is expected, and you will begin to remove layers of resentment, which we can cover in another video. There is a lot of layers when it comes to relationships here. Conflict seems to be a pretty juicy one. And the best part about this is it doesn't have to be showing up in a romantic relationship. This can show up in a familial setting. It can show up at work, with friends, so on and so forth. In the midst of that conflict, how open can we allow ourselves to be? How honest, how authentic can we allow ourselves to be? And you will see that it does take a little courage and an engagement and curiosity to essentially be them, to feel what they're feeling, to be so deeply connected that we forget ourselves and what we are protecting for a little bit of time. And if this is happening in unison between both people, or both people who are part of that particular conflict, something really beautiful begins to arise. We bond, we become closer, and the lines blur between any sense of separation even more. Maybe give it a shot. Maybe if you start to look at conflict in a little bit of a different way, in this way, just for a while, just as a game, maybe treat it like an experiment again, maybe something will become revealed and quite apparent. Would love to hear any questions or comments about this in the comments below. And maybe if any of you have put this into practice, would love to hear what seems to have arisen out of that. Looking forward to it.